I'm Evan Lily. As she said, we are a master's team from the University of Michigan. We worked with the Mathi Botanical Gardens as they have beaver on their property. So our advisor was one of the staff at the Mathi Botanical Gardens. And then we also worked with a client, the Huron River Watershed Council, to help inform a lot of what their work will look like in the future relating to beaver in the watershed. So I'm going to walk through just a brief history of beaver in case you're coming with like zero background knowledge. So beaver are members of the Castoridae family, which has been around for millions and millions of years, anywhere from 56 to 33 million years. And they have looked very different in all the different morphologies they've had. They've had like terrestrial, like diggers that form these crazy spirals in the ground. And then now we have our aquatic friends, the North American beaver, Castor canadensis is its Latin name. And we first see fossils of this particular morphology of our beaver around 7 million years ago. And there's also another beaver that looks identical and acts similar in Europe, the European beaver, Castor fiber. And so before settlement in North America, the beaver population was anywhere from 100 to 400 million. And so they were constantly drastically altering the landscape, and many of the characteristics of this area before colonization were entirely because of beaver activity. And then the beaver fur trade occurred. The beaver fur trade first swept across Europe, targeting that that European beaver, Castor fiber. And then when they ran out of beavers there, they had almost entirely exterminated the beaver in Europe. They came to North America and started looking for this North American beaver, and they found it a very plentiful population. And the fur trade resulted in this huge decline of the population. The lowest point was less than 100,000 individuals across all of North America. And this also coincided with beaver wetlands being drained for settlement and agriculture. And then it wasn't until the 1930s that we saw any sort of regulation on this trapping, any sort of wetland protection coming into play. And so now we have this landscape that is drastically altered. Humans actually settled in this part of Michigan because of this really rich soil as a result of this beaver activity and the wetlands that had been there. So we have this rich soil and we start farming it and we all settle here. And now the landscape looks like this, just entirely covered in human infrastructure. And so beavers are starting to come back. We've seen this over the course of the past 7 to 10 years. We've seen this slow increase in their population in southern Michigan. And obviously it looks a lot different because our landscape has drastically changed. And so as a result of that, we are seeing these conflicts with beavers. This, for example, is a culvert under a road that a beaver has worked very hard to plug. And, this obviously causes some issues. This can cause really dramatic and expensive infrastructure damage. And so our project kind of asked the question of what is the future of coexistence with beavers in this part of Michigan? Is it possible? To what degree? How many beavers could we live with on the landscape? And so our project had 3 pillars. The first was a habitat assessment where we used this model called BRAT, the Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool, which is a tool out of Utah State University. And this model seeks to figure out how many beaver dams could possibly be on our landscape given the habitat that exists for beavers. And so Mel will in a little bit talk more about what we did with that model. The second pillar was a policy analysis where we looked at Michigan policy pertaining to beaver and beaver management. And then more broadly, what are other states doing? What are some best practices we could try to mimic? And then lastly, a community engagement pillar where we try to understand the perspectives of our community. What are people thinking about beavers and what kind of conflicts are they facing already? All with the goal of trying to figure out how coexistence could be possible. This was the extent of our model, Fleming Creek, which is in the Huron River watershed. just a closer look at that creek shed. This encompasses the botanical gardens, if you've ever been there, and a lot of University of Michigan property. I'm going to talk through 3 main behaviors that beaver exhibit and why they're beneficial to the habitat. So the first is tree foraging. They primarily feed on the cambium, which is the living layer of tissue under tree bark. And this is what they eat all throughout the winter. In the summer, they feed on herbaceous plants as well. But in the winter, they eat primarily this cambium. And so they cut down trees for food, and they also cut down trees to create dams. This behavior of tree foraging can have huge impacts on the landscape. I think people often have trouble with it because they associate trees with their environmental impact, like it being a very positive thing to have trees on the landscape. And that is so true. And it's hard to deal with that kind of contradiction of feeling like, well, beavers are cutting down the trees that we've been told are good for the environment. What does this mean? But we want this kind of diversity and the diversity of habitat that this creates. And it has implications on canopy cover, which sometimes people can be nervous about. But in this case, there's so much diversity that they're creating that it turns out to be an overwhelmingly positive benefit. But we can talk more about that later also. They use that woody debris to build dams. And the reason for this behavior is that they are really clumsy on land. They don't do well. They're really at risk for predation when they're on land. So they need water stored to be able to move without risking that predation. And so they store a bunch of water to be able to expand their reach and access new areas for forage. And they also need at least 1 meter of water depth to survive the winter. They can't handle a freeze if the depth is less than 1 meter. And this has dramatic impact. The flooding from this behavior is what we hear about the most, about what people are worried about with beaver presence. But it has hugely positive impact. It increases groundwater storage, which can help mitigate drought and can also help slow wildfires. It increases habitat connectivity and wetland connectivity, which can increase populations of all of the at-risk and endangered creatures we have here in Michigan. It slows water flow. And then a big one, it stores sediment, which also means storing nutrients. So if you have a bunch of tributaries going into the Huron River and beavers are damming all those tributaries, they're helping to slow the storage of those nutrients that are running off the landscape, which can have huge downstream implications when you have a river that's like the Huron River that's going into a lake like Lake Erie that has these huge eutrophication issues. So I'm just going to give you a visual of that. So the short-term impact of dam building are the slowed water flow, that increased water surface area, that increases habitat. And then that leads to flood attenuation, which is huge in Michigan. There's a lot of flooding that we're forecasted to have as climate change increases. Increased groundwater exchange, which can help with droughts, habitat heterogeneity and sediment retention. And the long-term impacts of that are reduced downstream flooding, improved water quality, and increased biodiversity. And then the last behavior I'll touch on is canal digging. So when they've stored up enough water that they have saturated the landscape, they can start digging these canals. And these canals are, again, so that they can access new forage without having to climb onto land. And they have huge impacts on the biodiversity and habitat and what wetland area. And this is a beaver in his little canal he dug. And just so you can visualize all these impacts at once, this is from the same stream in Canada, and as a part of a huge research project they did on beaver dams there. And this is from 2003, before beavers had re-entered the landscape. And then this is 2016 with 5 beaver dams that one colony of beavers had created. And you can see just this huge impact. Like here we have a very straight and incised channel, something that we would kind of visualize as a river as we know it, but is not what rivers looked like before colonization. And then here you have a really complex braided channel with this wetland area a lot of diversity, and you can see those canals showing up as well. I'm going to pass it off to Mel to talk about our habitat assessment now.
Thanks, Evan. I'm Mel, and as she mentioned, a core part of our project was the habitat assessment of Fleming Creek in Ann Arbor, and we used the Beaver Restoration Assessment Tool as a baseline for developing our field protocol. And then just a little bit of background. So the Riverscape Network, it's developed through Utah State. It's a collaborative consortium composed of scientists. It provides open source standardized data for modeling, tools to help scientists and land managers develop plans for riparian ecosystem restoration. And then BRAT specifically that we use, it uses vegetation data, and it's an input to estimate beaver dam capacity in a watershed. One data layer is a 30-meter buffer along the wetland. This assesses the immediate streamside area. So is there enough woody vegetation for beaver to construct those dams? And then also it analyzes a 100-meter buffer. This is known as the harvest zone, and most beaver aren't willing to travel further than 100 meters off of the watershed because of that predation, like Evan mentioned. So they're basically trying to measure the landscape's capacities to sustainably support beavers over time. So is there enough space for the wetland to expand? And then is there enough forage for the colony to survive over time? And then other key inputs of BRAT are not just the vegetation, but also the hydrology and topography. So is the stream slope, it needs to be pretty low for beaver to be able to dam. It also has to be pretty wide for the stream. And then if the stream flow and power is too high, they won't be able to dam, such as like areas like Huron River, they're not able to dam that because it moves very quickly. And then overall, BRAT is trying to fill a gap between the ecological potential of an area and ultimately the conflict risk. So how is that going to interact with human infrastructure with the beaver's activity on the landscape? And then going into our habitat assessment, I talked a little bit about the BRAT, and then we did a ground truthing survey last summer. So we put our boots on the ground. We did a lot of data collection for vegetation. We collected beaver signs, so we dropped GPS points whenever we saw beaver chew, felled trees, dams, and lodges. On the right-hand side here, you can see an example of our 100-meter buffer along Fleming Creek, and it's composed of different vegetation classes through land fire. So this data is from USGS. So we wanted to see if the vegetation matches like what was online. So we wanted to assess if it was correct or not. And then, yeah, in total, we did 42 properties, both public and private. So we reached out to landowners, public areas, and then we visited a total of 2,500 meter squares. So we covered a lot of ground. And then this is the BRAT output. So on the left-hand side here is the original one. And then on the right-hand side, that's after we ground truth it. So right here is along the Fleming Creek. For the higher dam capacity is the blue areas, and then the lower dam capacity is the red areas. So we saw originally there were about 230 dams capacity for the Huron River. And then after our ground truthing, there were 230 dams capacity. So it did decrease a little bit. While the overall big picture didn't change too drastically, where the capacity was located, it shifted in important ways. Because of our 49% corrections from our surveys over the past summer, the high capacity blue areas actually increased. So they were more concentrated along longer string lengths. And so this highlights the need for accounting for those localized errors. So the satellite data needs to be corrected on a finer resolution. And overall, this is really important to anticipate future beaver activity and reentry. And yeah, as I mentioned, we found that ground truthing is really important. About 51% of the land fire classifications were correct. So there was a lot of correction that needed to be made. And this is really important just to be able to see if the habitat is suitable for beaver on the ground. And then going into our second pillar is the policy analysis. So we wanted to get an idea of where Michigan is at with their policy, where it's lacking, areas for future improvement and recommendations. And then we also looked at other states as comparison as well. So yeah, as part of our project, we conducted a policy review, as I mentioned. Having effective beaver policy is really important to successfully manage beaver conflicts while also maintaining the ecosystem services that they provide. And then also just having that, being able to successfully manage beaver conflicts to have, maintaining those ecosystem services overall, and being able to manage those populations based on the trapping season and just being able to keep an eye out on those numbers. So what we found currently in Michigan, there is a regulated trapping season like most states from fall to spring. However, there's no bag limit. And then beaver can be taken outside of the season if they're causing damage to private property. So you don't need a permit for that. You can just do that outside of the season. Also, we found that policies and processes don't currently exist for coexistence solutions. So it's really hard for people to be able to make those decisions and moving away from lethal management because there's not a lot of direction to go. We did meet with Eagle, we met with the DNR and other agencies. So there's not like a formal permitting process for coexistence devices such as culvert fencing and pond levelers. I'll get into those in a little bit. Also, relocation is illegal at the current moment, so there's not a lot of places for them to go, which is why a lot of the times they're trapped out because there isn't that framework. So yeah, going into some of the coexistence solutions. Here we have the culvert fencing. So there's a few different variations. So it's just trying to prevent, like Evan showed earlier, trying to prevent blockage of those culverts by damming. There's like a few different ways to do it. And then second are the flow devices. So the ultimate goal of that is to, it's a solution to manage water levels. People have concerns about flooding on their property. And so you're able to put in a pipe basically over the dam. So the dam is able to stay there. And there's also an intake cage there so the beaver won't plug up that pipe. And then also beaver love, well, no, they don't love that. Whenever they hear the sound of water, their instinct is to dam it immediately. So based on the pipe and the intake cage, they're not able to detect that sound. So they're not gonna, cause more problems. And then, you can actually set the height that you need for the water level, depending on your wetland area. And then we also looked at different states that do it well. One example that came up was California. They have a very informative website just about their beaver behavior, ecology. Like they provide an actual framework, unlike Michigan, where fish and wildlife people are able to go to a person's property, kind of inform the person what the options are. So if you want to put in a flow device, there's a very formal process. So people are able to do that pretty easily. There's also funding involved. So there's not a lot of people are able to get that support if they want to have beaver on their property. And then overall, we found that Michigan can improve in many ways. Public resources on the background ecology benefits and non-lethal conflict resolutions. There needs to be a better regulatory process for utilizing those coexistence strategies. I think we are moving in that direction slowly. We got to work with someone from Oakland University, and they've really been advocating for beaver. They have a beaver family on their campus. So they're actually in the process of working with Eagle and doing a pilot program to see if those coexistence devices are effective in Michigan and if we can have like a pathway moving forward. So it's really exciting. And then also considering relocation as a management consideration where feasible. As Evan mentioned, eutrophication is a huge problem. So maybe we could move beaver to certain areas to kind of mitigate those effects and restore certain areas. Where maybe the beaver won't cause as many problems in less dense areas. And then with that, I'll pass it over to Sydney.
Thanks, Mel. Hi everyone, I'm Sydney Lubeck, and I'll take us through our last pillar, which is the community engagement pillar. And really, the purpose here was to get into the community, talk to people so that we can understand what are the viewpoints bouncing around with beaver recently re-entering our watersheds right in the last 7 to 10 years, and what challenges are we seeing so that we can bring people together to talk about those problems that we're having, and so that our team could create resources that our communities can lean on when they're struggling with coexisting with beaver in our watersheds. But before I do that, I just want to call back to some of the great benefits that Evan talked through. When beaver are in our watersheds, they are awesome. They do so much for us, from carbon sequestration, water purification, increasing biodiversity. They're great. But as Evan mentioned, our landscape has really changed since they were here last. So when they re-enter our watersheds, there are real challenges that people face. And the tolerance for those challenges and the conflicts, they vary person to person, property to property. One of the most important challenges, though, that we identified as part of our project was just the wide range of viewpoints that people have, and frankly, the passion that people present those viewpoints with. It's great to see people passionate, but it really can cause some intense conflict in a situation that already is high energy and we need to respond fast. But between acknowledging the benefits and the challenges is where we will find to coexist. Ironically, those perspectives that maybe we saw as challenges in our project because it slowed us down or we didn't get what we needed to finish some of our projects, they're actually one of the most important ingredients for creating long-term solutions that our community can rely on and implement to coexist with beavers long-term. As I mentioned, a core part of our project was creating resources that our community can lean on. And so we have kind of 3 buckets, and they build off of the research we did within the community to identify certain gaps and researching other states that already have a well built out coexistence program. The 3 buckets that we identified, the first is education resources. If you go on the DNR's website, there's not a ton. If you go on Eagle's website, there's not a ton. So people don't have access to a lot of educational content that can educate them on what are beavers, honestly, what do they do, why do they do it, and why does it matter? So to help bridge this gap, we created 2 things that I want to highlight today. The first is an easily digestible and distributable pamphlet that can be really easily understood by anyone. And it's really just a quick hit, a quick read of what is a beaver, what do they do, where do they live, and why do they do it? And we also mention how to coexist with them. The second one is for people who are really interested in the research and the literature. We created an annotated bibliography from the research that we compiled throughout the last year and a half. And it has all of the amazing peer-reviewed journal articles that we read and really informed our project. The next bucket of resources that we saw our communities really needing is just a shared understanding of policy. Again, we created 2 resources for this. One that's easily digestible and can be communicated out to the public. That would be our fact sheet. It has quick hits on what are the policies, what is trapping like here in Michigan, and what are some coexistence strategies. And the second one is more for organizations that receive some of those calls from their community members, that oftentimes those organizations don't have the bandwidth to research or give accurate or well thought out responses. So this hopefully is a bridge between that of compiling what are some of the common questions that we've seen come up into one location that they can have as a quick resource to respond back to. And the last bucket isn't something that we necessarily had time to dig into as part of our project, but the communities and the states and cities that do beaver management really well are ones who have thought out, have created tools that enable proactive, and informed decision making. This example, I think you can see it, okay? It's a decision matrix. And what's cool about this is it's a way to proactively think through if beavers re-enter the landscape or if they're here already, what are the challenges that we think we will face and how do we want to respond to them when they come up? So that way we're taking time beforehand to logically think through how we want to respond versus responding in a time period that's usually crunch time, right? If a beaver's flooding out a road, you don't have 5 weeks to figure out how you want to respond. So this is a cool way to proactively think about it. This is an example from Alberta, Canada. We really like this resource because it's online and it's interactive. So you can see these little yellow plus signs. You can click on them. So when you're encountering a challenge and you follow the decision path to how you want to combat that challenge, it gives you resources for who to contact to help you implement those challenges. So this is a really cool resource. Now, these 3 buckets are great, but the absolute number one thing is having a beaver management plan. A beaver management plan is a way for a community to think about locally, how do we want to handle beaver? So it will include all of the information that I just said into one localized place that can be communicated out to your community members so that everyone's aware of how this community or city or state is addressing beaver conflict. The ones that are developed well and are really impactful are the ones that involve the community. So you're getting that diverse perspective that I talked about earlier. And then it emphasizes building relationships. We really need to bring people together in times of conflict versus pull them apart. So where do we go from here? Our project identified some areas of future research and opportunities for Michigan to improve. There are many, but these are the ones that we want to highlight for you today. The first one is what Mel mentioned. We need a policy pathway for these coexistence devices. They have been proven to work in other states. There are so many studies out there. There are so many people using them. Unfortunately, we just don't in Michigan have a lot of cases of them being used because they haven't been needed. So we need to get this up and running and create a policy pathway that allows beaver to stay on the landscape if the landowner wants them to. Because right now, if they're causing conflict and flooding out, there's not a lot of options except for lethal removal. And the second part is Michigan-based research. There is so much research out west. There's so much research out east. The Midwest is really lacking. Again, it's because we're just seeing beaver re-enter our watersheds. So we need some research here to help support why beaver are important. The first one, as Mel and Evan both mentioned, is understanding how the dams that beaver create could potentially help reduce eutrophication of our Great Lakes. The second is understanding how beaver and our beloved sport fish populations are interacting with each other. The third is, like Evan said, how are beaver being on the landscape, chewing down trees, creating more canopy cover? How does that impact the water temperatures in our rivers, streams, and lakes? And then the last one, again, like Mel said, example being done right now at Oakland, but just testing that the coexistence devices proven to work in other states do work here in our watersheds. Now, I know that I said we have so much to do, but I do want to highlight what is being done. In the last 2 years, so many conversations have been happening about beaver and beaver coexistence and organizations coming together. So I wanted to highlight a couple here. The first, as we said, Oakland is working with Eagle to pilot the flow devices to hopefully prove the efficacy of them. The second is the Washtenaw County Drain Commissioner's Office. They had a big problem with beaver. They removed beaver. There was a big controversy. But you know what? The people at the Washtenaw County Drain Commissioner's Office, they are the first ones to be working on a beaver management plan. That's great. That's amazing. They are the first people to work on a beaver management plan here in Michigan, where they're thinking through some of the conflicts and how they want to address conflicts. They're creating zones. It's really cool work. And not only are they doing that, But they brought a committee together of diverse perspectives, ecologists, people who work on the drain commissioner's office, people at the university. They brought together really a diverse perspective to help create the best beaver management plan that they could. So I really admire them. And then the last one is, has anybody heard of like the Stewardship Network? It's a network of people who, it's honestly, I think it's all across the country now, but it started here in Michigan by a woman named Lisa Brush. And it's basically a collection of stewards who are working to steward our land. So a lot of the same principles that the Sierra Club has. There's a collection of stewards who are focused on beaver coexistence, and they're meeting to discuss some of the recommendations that we have as part of our project to understand what would be most impactful for the community, who can help us implement those recommendations, and when can we do that. And then the last one is we may have graduated and our project may be over, but people are still asking us to present. Just in 2 days, we're presenting at the Huron River Chain of Lakes Association, which is huge, right? Like an HOA wants us to come present on why beaver are impactful. That tells me that the tides are turning and people are really thinking about how to coexist with beaver. And then the other conference that we're presenting at is the NACCR conference. This is a conference that's put on annually for a group of practitioners that are in the conservation and restoration space, which tells me practitioners also want to hear about this, which is really, really, really good. So through our research of other states and kind of taking a step back and thinking about Michigan, there are 5 key pillars that we see states who are really ahead in beaver coexistence take. California's one, Massachusetts one, Utah's up there, Oregon's up there. All 5 of them have kind of followed this path. The first one is what you all here are doing today. Educate yourself. We have to be educated in order to advocate. So the best thing that you can do is be educated on beavers and why they matter specifically to this community. The second one is organize. So after we've educated ourselves, educating other people is the next step. A really good example of this is Rachel Siegel. Has anybody heard of the Midwest Beaver Alliance? It's an organization out of Illinois, and I don't think she has an ecology degree. I think she's like a writer. She picked this up and created this nonprofit, the Michigan Beaver Alliance, and she holds an annual conference for people to come together in the Midwest and discuss challenges and solutions that they're having, and they can share things. So it's just a way for people to organize and really just support each other. The next 2, advocate and partner. And I like to put these 2 together because it really is going to take us all. We need to advocate. Yes, we need to push for policy reform, but the organizations that are going to need to change also need to kind of work with us. Again, a really good example of this is Andrea Knudsen at Open University. She worked for 3 years to get this pilot project, 3 years. And she was persistent and she advocated for herself. She advocated for beaver, and it ended, and she did it in a respectful way that led to partnership with Eagle. Eagle wants to partner with her to create this pilot project. So that was really impactful. And the last one is funding. When we're talking about beaver and challenges, oftentimes the answer costs money, right? These devices cost money. If you want to, make a change to your property that allows them to stay on the landscape, that costs money. So we need to find a way to fund that stuff that enables people to make that choice to keep beaver on the landscape. 2 good examples. Massachusetts, they have a program that incentivizes people to keep beaver on their landscape, monetary incentive. The other one is California. They have funding set up to help offset the costs of implementing some of the coexistence devices. So right now, I guess before I get off the slide, I would say right now in Michigan, we're here. We need to really educate ourselves, and we really need to educate our communities on why they're important so that then we can come together and start advocating for that policy reform. And to go with that, we have some recommended readings for everybody who's interested. The first two, Eager and Beaverland, are narrative-like books. Ben Goldfarb is a great science communicator. Leah Phillips, also really great writer. It's a cool read. It's a fun read. You get to read about the history, why beavers matter. It has a lot of ecological science background in it. Those are great. The Beaver Institute is a organization created by actually the founder of the Beaver Flow device, Mike Callahan. He's from Massachusetts. He then founded this nonprofit, the Beaver Institute, and it's across the country, supports beaver coexistence, but this website has a collection of resources that is really anything on beaver. If you want to find anything on beaver, this is a great place to go. And then this last one, has anybody heard of Emily Fairfax? She is like the #1 science communicator about beaver right now. Has anybody seen the movie Hoppers or heard of it? Have you heard of it?
Well, chat's been lighting up about it. Yeah.
About beaver, which again tells me that this is a relevant topic. And they consulted Emily Fairfax to make sure that the ecological foundation of the movie was correct. So this is a paper by Emily Fairfax that really goes in depth about beaver ecology, beaver history, why they're important, certain restoration initiatives that are going on. And then the final product is our report. We created a website. So this is a QR code to our website where you can find the resources that I presented today. They're downloadable, so they can be shared with whomever else you think would find them impactful. And then also has our final report. It's pretty long, so I don't know if you're gonna read it, but it's good. And then I just want to take a step back and just acknowledge everyone who made this project possible. Mike Post, he's a curator at Mathite Botanical Gardens. He maybe was like the first beaver advocate here in Michigan. He is really beaver heavy. We love him. Our project would not have been as good without him. And then our clients at the Huron Watershed Council, Kate Laramie and Jason Frenzel, they took on this project. It was a controversial problem, but they took us on and it really was meaningful for us and meaningful for them. And then just the funding that the University of Michigan and Mathite gave us, it really helped support our project and getting us out there. And thank you all for coming. This is, again, part of advocacy is coming here and educating yourself. So I so appreciate you taking the time out of your Thursday night to be with us tonight. Thank you.
One of the people online actually has beavers on her property, and she's on the Raisin River in the Irish Hills, and the neighbors want to have it. So I'm just going to read her question. It says, I have a beaver on my property. I want it to stay. My neighbors have hired a trapper because it is flooding their lawn. Is there anyone that can help me install something to stay?
Jordan, Duncan,
No.
Justin.
Yeah.
There's a company called the Beaver Leavers that Justin Genzua,
Yeah.
He runs it, and I think he's a perfect first point of contact because he has a lot of intel on the region, and knows how to work within kind of the existing policy framework, and has a lot of helpful resources. Also, if you're crafty and good at constructing things, you can also go to the Beaver Institute website itself and learn how to construct these things. It's very like rudimentary materials, like you need a pipe and some barb, like wire and nails, and you're good. So it's definitely doable. We participated in a workshop where we made them, and it was a very doable learning process. So that's also an option.
Do you know Justin's last name?
Well,
They shared a link. to
It's
this.
beaverlevers.com.
Oh,
It
okay,
pops right up.
cool.
It was actually Thomas.
Of course,
Tom
yes,
Radcliffe.
at Oakland, yes.
Yeah, and he said thanks for the shout out. He's sorry you could.
Oh, nice. No, thank you, Tom. So Tom and Andrea are working together on the pilot project at Oakland University.
Do the beavers have favorite trees? I have a river and I wanna produce trees that maybe they might.
Can we stop sharing?
Yeah.
You want me to stop sharing? Yeah, I can.
So the question was, do beavers have favorite trees?
Mhm. Yeah, absolutely. It seems to vary by region. Like it's very like they teach them
Are there other
their
questions in
offspring
the
this
chat?
behavior, but in the literature in general, it seems to be willows, aspen, cottonwoods, and then at the botanical gardens we see our beavers also chewing the bur oaks, which we didn't expect because it's harder.
Questions
But
too.
they also seem to like the oaks. Yeah, definitely aspen, willow, and cottonwoods are safe bets.
Also renew them themselves. You can take all three of the trees, cut them off, and they'll all renew.
Exactly.
That's.
There's a system stays and they shoot up in shoots.
Yeah.
You cut them off and then within a couple of years, they bring back by 80 again, cut them off again.
Yeah.
It's renewable.
There's actually a paper too about beavers, like basically farming, like planting their willows intentionally in the bank to try to renew some shrubbery. So interesting.
Aspen is the largest living organism too.
Right.
You take an aspen tree, they can go for huge amounts of area and it's all connected to each other.
What was your reaction to, and what did you learn from the Leslie Park thing that happened?
So the question, hold on, we've got multiple. Can you repeat the questions? That will help the people because they can't hear. Thanks.
I think you're still talking, looks like. Well, I heard enough. Yes.
Oh, microphone, yeah.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Is that better? Okay.
Yeah, there it is.
Okay, so that question was, what did we learn from the Leslie Park golf course situation? What happened was there was a family of beaver that were living on the golf course. They were removed. The public was outraged, sent hate mail to the drain commissioner's office. That is what I'm talking about, where we learned a lot of perspectives on beavers. And it really it was a real challenge for our team trying to talk to all different players because what happened was when the outrage occurred, it really pitted people against each other, right? Like no one was working with each other anymore. Everybody was just protecting themselves and whatever decisions they made. What people don't know is because there are pathways for implementing these coexistence devices, right? We don't have that pathway. Truly, the only solution is lethal removal. So yes, they were lethally removed, and yes, that's sad, but the drain commissioner's office, like that's the only choice had. That was not something that they had the choice over. It was flooding and someone asked them to do it and they are legally responsible for that waterway. So I guess what we learned, and I want others to talk, is like there's always more to the story, and coming to the table with curiosity instead of a judgment, honestly, is gonna get you farther faster. It's gonna get you farther faster. And to the Washington County Drain Commissioner's Office, who I highlighted, they are the first in Michigan to create a beaver management plan. So learning just like we are how to manage beaver in our watersheds.
Because they had.
Yeah.
Because they had to, yeah.
Yeah.
They were tied, weren't they?
They were big. Mhm.
And I think also like what we found, which we've talked about, and I think Sydney highlighted really well, is that there was such a knowledge gap when we like started having these conversations. Just the amount that, you know, the drain commissioner, the road commissioner, Eagle, DNR, the amount that they didn't know and were not on the same page about was making it so much harder. And I think the conversations have started to happen where they're talking to each other now and they're like starting to have these conversations and getting on the same page. But when we started this project, there were huge knowledge gaps. I think made that moment and made that conflict so much worse because nobody knew what the person was talking about, you know.
People complain about their trees getting taken, we had problems. Like, and so I had a big huge load, and what happened, beavers just kept eating around it. So, you use chain link fence. To go to the fence companies, you get your used chain link fence. You cut it, put it around the tree, it's thick enough to gauge the beaver won't eat through it. The people on, you can put the used fencing around their tree, for all the ones the beaver gone. All of us that put the chain link fence around the trees, we never had a problem there. Yeah, but you gotta use the chain link.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
And that's a great example of why proactive thinking, it really benefits everybody. It really benefits everybody. At culvert fence, the flow devices are not proactive. That's when the beaver is there, they build the dam, then you level the water. But the culvert fencing is another example of a proactive way that you can prevent flooding. I mean, it's an easily created solution, just like the tree wrapping.
Right.
So could that predictive model, like given to drain commissions that actually like do that proactive stuff with culverts?
Yeah. It's also publicly available. It's on our website as well. If you all have properties where you're thinking about these things, you can also zoom in and see what your property looks like. But absolutely, it's great for that proactive management, especially in those areas where the habitat might be right for beavers, but the infrastructure isn't. Do you guys have anything to say about the opportunity areas?
Yeah, I think to that point, like, yes, I think it's a great resource. I think though, the fact of the matter is the way that we have built our environment does not allow for beavers in certain places. So I think I saw Mike Callahan, he's the one who created all the culvert fencing, the flow devices. We went to his workshop, and like statistic that stuck out to me is this guy who's so beaver advocate, did all this stuff. Even he says these solutions only work 75% of the time. So there's 25% of the time, unfortunately, that beaver will have to be removed. And if relocating is not an option in our state, then it's lethal removal. It's the only option that we have.
So Diane's asking online if you know why relocation is legal in Michigan.
Yeah, so there's some good logic behind it, which is that in order to do relocation well, you have to keep the family unit in mind. So if you break up the family unit, they might not survive the winter. They really rely on each other for keeping dams managed, for creating lodges, for getting enough food cache for the winter. So if you attempt to relocate and only get some of the family unit, they're not going to survive that relocation. And then the other concern is spread of disease. So depending on to what degree and where you're spreading, there might be some issue with that. That being said, they've been doing relocation out west and in Europe for a long time now, and they've had a lot of success stories if it's done well and carefully. So I think that's kind of where the logic for having relocation be illegal is, just that it's a challenge and you have to do it really carefully and intentional. But it's also been done well other places and been used as a tool for wetland restoration, and has been really successful.
Has there ever been become problem because they're reproducing and there's not, they're getting into other people's land.
No, beavers have, I think it's kind of this misunderstanding because the rodents, people assume they're like crazy producers and off the wall population. They have really high mortality rates. Estimated at like 75% mortality rates, and it's natural without trapping being included in the mix. And so it's really hard. And I think that's why they're only now recovering from the fur trade that happened a long time ago. So I don't think right now or in the foreseeable future there's a risk for overpopulation.
Folks has a question. Monica, do you want to give your question?
Hi.
I can't hear you if you're talking.
They want you to put your QR code back up too.
Oh, sure.
Monica?
Hi. So thank you. So I typed this in the chat too, but my question is the DNR. Can you hear me?
Yeah, no, I can. You want to?
So I was wondering if the scientific data that you collected, and I know you mentioned that you've graduated, but could it be provided to Sarah Thompson, the wildlife chief at the DNR? Because last month on WCO number 3 for 2026, the DNR NRC just approved management seasons for several animals, including muskrats, raccoons, and beavers. So that essentially means year-round hunting is now legal on private and public land. But if the DNR could help spread the word on these humane solutions like the beaver deceivers and all those kinds of things, that might help their populations because they don't really have the data to know what the impact of true hunting season and then a management season will have on the populations. So having data on the importance of what beavers do for the land and the ecosystems, I think might help in your first, on that last slide where it said we're at the education stage. I think, as you mentioned with the golf course in Ann Arbor, where there was such a shock, I guess, at how the situation was handled. Spreading the word and educating.
I think we lost
We lost you.
for a second. Maybe I can.
Stop presenting.
So, the Michigan chapter Wildlands and Wildlife Committee, we've actually been submitting comments about some of those changes in seasons, specifically related to coyotes. But
All right.
but we definitely can follow up on that as well and make sure that we're putting comments in related to that.
Yeah, and oh, sorry.
Can we get, I'm sorry to interrupt, can you get copies of those, the brochure and the?
Sure.
So send that to.
Yeah, that's you. Yeah.
I'm sorry.
And I've been having conversations with a few people in the Michigan DR, including the fur bearer. And so they do have access to all of our information and data.
Yeah, that natural resource, right now the committee that oversees that is very pro hunting,
Right.
and to the point where they last year said we're not going to allow year-round coyote hunting anymore because it's not sportsmanlike. And then completely, because of the hunting lobby's pressure, completely flip-flopped that this year. So, you know, I don't know if you guys heard, but you know, the Michigan United Conservation Clubs, MUCC, they just folded. Yeah, they just went under this week, which is kind of sad, but they have a lot of this, like the coyote hunting and all that kind of stuff. They were really behind pushing those things. So hopefully and we're talking about this in the chapter, there could be an opportunity now to try and make sure that some of the non-killing, you know, conservationists out there that are interested more, because they're also, like, it came up again this year that, you know, they want to do sandhill crane hunting. So it's like we're watching those things and we're putting comments and stuff in, but and usually in the legislature we're able to kind of get those things turned around where it doesn't happen, but that, you know, NRC is they've really gone in the other direction the last couple of years. So hopefully that will come back around.
You might get somebody interesting like Ducks Unlimited, because this creates huge duck habitats.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Trout Unlimited too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because duck habitats for teal with ducks.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, no, I think that's accurate. Yeah.